The president speaks for himself,
exactly.
Right? That is always number one. Eugene Daniels, thank you, my friend, for coming up early with us. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in the Saudi Arabian port city of Jeddah today, where he will meet with the Saudi crown prince ahead of peace talks tomorrow between U.S. and Ukrainian officials. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to meet later today with the crown prince in the capital city of Riyadh. It's unclear if Zelensky will attend the peace discussions tomorrow. They're aimed at ending the years-long war with Russia. Meanwhile, NBC News reports that President Trump has made clear that a minerals deal with Kyiv won't be enough to restart U.S. aid and intelligence sharing. According to an administration official and other U.S. official, Trump wants to see a change in Zelensky's attitude towards peace talks, including possible territorial concessions, movement towards elections, and even potentially Zelensky stepping down. He offered that, by the way, in return for a potential peace. Meanwhile, President Trump says he still believes Russia wants to end the war in Ukraine. Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office on Friday, the president defended Russia's intense bombing of Ukraine and said he believes Putin does want peace.
President Putin is bombing Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you still believe him when he tells you that he wants peace?
Yeah, no, I believe him. I think we're doing very well with Russia. But right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine. And I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now.
5 people are lucky to be alive after a small plane carrying them crashed into a parking lot of a retirement community. That happened yesterday in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. There you see video of the wreckage showing the plane engulfed in flames and smoke. Those are stunning images. Everyone on board thankfully survived and were taken to the hospital, though their conditions were not available. First responders were on the scene within minutes as they raced to put out multiple fires. Officials say no one on the ground was hurt and there was no structural damage. Air traffic control radio traffic indicated that someone on the plane reported an open door on the aircraft shortly after takeoff. Right now, the NTSB and FAA are working together to investigate this crash. Meanwhile, the number of measles cases in the United States is growing, with a new case now confirmed in Maryland. Public health officials said yesterday the virus was detected in a resident who had traveled recently internationally and who could have exposed others at Dulles Airport or in the Johns Hopkins Howard County Pediatric Emergency Room last week. Officials also said the Maryland case is not related to the current measles outbreak in Texas and New Mexico, where more than 200 cases and 2 deaths have already been reported. And 4 separate brush fires broke out on Long Island, New York over the weekend. The largest of the brush fires burned over 400 acres of land and required a response from 80 different fire departments. In total, the fires are expected to have burned through 600 to 700 acres of land across Long Island. High winds and dry conditions are believed to have fueled the weekend's fires. In response, New York Governor Kathy Hochul has declared a state of emergency there. As of this morning, dozens of detectives are currently looking into the origin of these fires, but the cause so far remains unclear. And still ahead this morning, we're going to turn to sports with highlights from the NBA and college.
Dark, and the Clippers trail by 1. We're going to take some time off the clock here. Leonard, 4 to shoot. Kawhi for the win. Yes! Hot damn! The Clippers win in overtime!
Kawhi Leonard, short jumper at the buzzer, wins it for the Los Angeles Clippers there. They beat the Sacramento Kings 111 to 110 in overtime. And let's go now to the College Court in East Lansing and some shoving between conference rivals as Michigan State closed out a 79-62 win over Michigan to win the Big Ten regular season title by 3 games. The scuffle at center court sparked over Wolverines players standing on Michigan State's logo during a senior day tradition. After starting the season unranked, the Spartans entered this week's conference tournament on a 7-game winning streak, including 5 over ranked teams, as they eye a top seed for March Madness. Meanwhile, Champs Week is already underway on the women's court, and South Carolina's emerged as the #1 overall seed in the upcoming NCAA tournament. A dominant 64-45 win over Texas to three-peat as SEC champions yesterday. And USC's fall against UCLA in the Big Ten title game will likely see South Carolina in the top spot on Selection Sunday. And turning now to some of the latest NFL offseason moves, and there have been many this week. It appears star Seahawks receiver DK Metcalf is now headed to Pittsburgh, where he's reportedly agreed to a 5-year, $150 million contract extension with the Steelers after requesting a trade away from Seattle last week. Metcalf's trade comes days after the Seahawks dealt quarterback Geno Smith to Las Vegas Raiders. Seattle now has 5 picks in the first 3 rounds of this year's draft. Meanwhile, over in Buffalo, MVP quarterback Josh Allen is staying with the Bills through the 2030 season. He's doing it on a reported 6-year, $330 million contract that includes $250 million guaranteed. It marks the largest guaranteed total ever given to an NFL player, though you really can't blame him after he played this season. And finally, one highlight to show you out of MLB spring training in Florida.
Towering fly ball to deep center. At the track, at the wall, the park just big enough to hold it. Bernal just missed.
Yankees outfielder Spencer Jones with an impressive catch out in center to rob a home run from the Cardinals and keep it a tie game in the 8th inning. But St. Louis would still go on to win 6-5. It's a bummer. Time now for a check on the weather. For that, we've got meteorologist Michelle Grossman with us with the forecast. Michelle, what do you got today?
Good morning, Allie. Well, it's a soggy start in the southeast. We're looking at rain all throughout today into early tomorrow morning. It's going to be moderate to heavy. Could see some flash flooding there as well, maybe even a few embedded thunderstorms. The northern tier of the nation, we are looking at some fiery weather, fire alerts for 11 million people there. Record highs, 20 to 40 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. So that, along with really gusty winds, dry conditions, will prompt those fire alerts. Sunny and seasonable conditions throughout the southwest. Could see a little bit of rain and snow in the Pacific Northwest, but that really gets going with a new system on Wednesday. Notice all that green and blue along the west coast. That is rain and snow, and that's going to be our next cross-country weather maker with some impacts Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday across the country. But for Wednesday, plenty of sunshine throughout the northern tier of the nation, the central plains, the southern plains, into portions of the Ohio Valley. Spring warmth in the mid-Atlantic, the Carolinas, the southeast. Temperatures in the upper 70s in the southeast on Wednesday. By Friday, that storm system makes its way into portions of the middle of the country. We're looking at green from North Dakota all the way to the Gulf Coast states, some heavy snow in portions of the Intermountain West. Rain and snow still in the Pacific Northwest and along the West Coast as well. We're going to be dry on Friday. A nice day in the Mid-Atlantic, the Carolinas, the Southeast. Temperatures in the 60s, the 70s, even in the mid-80s in Florida. So we're watching those Monday showers throughout the Southeast. This is an area of low pressure that's sort of just lingering over the area. It was wet yesterday. Will be wet once again today. It's beneficial rain. We need this rain in the Carolinas, but again, could be soaking at times, could see some flash flooding with that heavy rainfall. Notice the reds, the oranges, the yellows, Allie, that's where we're seeing the heaviest rain. So Wilmington all the way to Charleston. Back to you.
Michelle Grossman, thank you, my friend. And still ahead this morning, we've got the latest from Capitol Hill as House lawmakers push ahead with a stop. Welcome back to Way Too Early. Just before 5:30 on the East Coast, 2:30 out west, I'm Ali Vitale. And today, the House Rules Committee is expected to take up Speaker Mike Johnson's stopgap plan to fund the government. Johnson's bill would keep the government running through September at current spending levels. It would also boost military funding, but cut non-defense spending. In response to those cuts, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is calling on Democrats to vote no on this bill. If all Democrats vote against the measure, it's a tricky situation for Speaker Johnson, who will only be able to afford to lose one vote, as Republican Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky has already said he plans to vote no on this entire package. Massie, of course, has stuck to his guns. When he says no, he tends to mean no. President Trump, for his part, is ramping up a pressure campaign on other Republicans, writing on social media, quote, all Republicans should vote yes next week. Great things are coming for America, and I'm asking you all to give us a few months to get us through to September so we can continue to put the country's financial house in order. Joining us now, congressional reporter for Punchbowl News, Mika Soellner. Talk to us a little bit, Mika, about the dynamics here that Speaker Johnson is going to have to deal with, because you look at the way that government funding has gone in the past, and the open secret on the Hill is it has to be bipartisan, because 30 or some odd members of the Republican side have never voted for just a kick the can down the road continuing resolution. Is that going to change now?
I think the biggest factor that's going to change in this instance is Trump saying that he wants to see unity, don't mess this up. He doesn't want any dissent on this vote. I think that's going to be a big change from previous years under the Biden administration, even before that, because Trump is such a massive, massive influence right now, especially in a Republican trifecta. I do think Johnson was really, really working to make sure that there really is no one other than Massey who will dissent on this vote. And, if they do, I think that they can expect a Truth Social post from President Trump.
And the power of a Truth Social post could be both very problematic in a primary or also not problematic at all. And so I guess we'll test the political weight of that. But who are some of the names that you're still looking at? Because for me, I'm thinking Chip Roy, Tim Burchett. I mean, these are guys who have never gone along with funding like this before. Are they now?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of these conservative hardliners and members of the Freedom Caucus, some of them have never voted for a CR. I know that they've been having meetings at the White House with the president, who is trying to sway them on the CR. They had one last week. Some people were saying they expect more calls or more outreach from the White House on this, and I know that some people are starting to come around. One member in particular, Eric Burlison of Missouri, he's very against CRs, but he said that he's even starting to come around after that meeting.
That's really quite a powerful thing. Then the way that Trump could potentially move votes on this issue specifically, as so many members have staked, really like planted a flag in the ground almost on government funding. So that's going to be fascinating to watch. And then, of course, there's the role that Democrats play in this, because many of them feel there's no reason to help Republicans continue to fund the government when the White House has really just ignored the way that Congress has appropriated funding in the first place. But is there any kind of negative political impact to not voting on this?
Yeah, I mean, if Democrats, don't do their part in terms of voting for this or helping Republicans anyway, and I know a few will peel away from their party, I mean, Republicans will just blame the shutdown on them. So it's politically, it's going to be detrimental for them to, help pass this along. But I know that there is not a lot of goodwill between the two parties right now, so definitely not in a position to help Republicans in any way.
And Republicans put this package together without consulting Hakeem Jeffries. It was solely done with Republicans in the room. Really, when we're talking about this government funding battle, though, I think it's important to point out the calendar that we're dealing with. Yes, the deadline is on Friday, but the House is actually hoping to dispense with this on Tuesday, right?
Right. Yeah. So we're expected to bring it up to a vote tomorrow, and after that, the House is gone, and they're not going to want to deal with this. So it's really crunch time right now.
Yeah, and they can always come back. But at the same time, I think the other Democratic dynamic that you and I were talking about during the break is the frustration that we've started to hear from rank-and-file Democratic members regarding the way that the party was physically on display during the joint address, some of them having much more open protests to President Trump, others being more seated, more demure, to use a word that's been overused. There's concern that it didn't do the party any favors. Even Congressman Jake Auchincloss was on here last week saying neither party did themselves any favors, but certainly Democrats were in that bucket. What's the frustration that you're hearing? And is it all directed at Hakeem Jeffries, or is it more widespread than that?
I think it's a little bit more widespread, but there is a lot of frustration right now internally against Democratic leadership, saying that I was speaking with one member, last week who told me that they just don't see a lot of direction in terms of what they actually should be done. And this person was upset in the fact that these people that do go against leadership never get any consequences in terms of their actions.
That's a really interesting point, because, of course, this is a caucus that was used to the iron fist ruling style of Nancy Pelosi. And certainly Jeffries has a very different vibe, a different tone, and a different tactic around him. He's a listener who tries to build consensus and then guide the party that way. It's going to be interesting to see if that's the winning effort here as Democrats continue down this stretch. Mika Sollner, thank you, as always. Time now for business. For that, let's bring in CNBC's Sylvia Amaro, live with us from London. Sylvia, good morning, good afternoon. After last week's stock market slump and a job report that missed forecasts, what are you watching for in the markets now this week?
Very good morning, Ali. Well, at this stage, though, futures point to a negative start to the trading day on Wall Street. This, as investors are showing considerable amounts of concern, really, around the potential new trade barriers. We, of course, saw China imposing retaliation measures on U.S. goods as well earlier today. And indeed, there are concerns that this is going to lead to lower economic growth in the United States. However, we did hear Jerome Powell on Friday, the chair of the Fed, suggesting that the U.S. economy is still in a strong footing. However, However, I would highlight that this week we're going to get new CPI figures on Wednesday, and that could give us a little bit of more clarity really about what the Fed could do in a couple of weeks' time as markets are indeed concerned around a potential economic slowdown.
Yeah, so possible clarity from the Fed. But then there's also China's tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, which have taken effect. What impact is that going to have?
Well, it could have implications for U.S. consumers. So at this stage, we are looking at tariffs from China on certain U.S. agricultural products that are totaling about $22 billion US. This comes after the U.S. administration imposed tariffs on Chinese goods. So this is a retaliation move. But indeed, it could lead to higher consumer prices in the United States, and there could be wider ramifications for inflation and, of course, ultimately for the Fed as well. It is still too early to assess that economic impact, Ali, but there could be ramifications here for U.S. consumers, no doubt.
Yeah, those are the fears here back at home. Tesla, meanwhile, shares have given up almost all of their post-election gains. How is this impacting CEO Elon Musk and his net worth?
So it's so interesting because we did see a lot of momentum for Tesla shares in the run-up to the inauguration. But looking at the performance of Tesla over the past 7 weeks, we have seen the stock declining. There are question marks here about whether the links between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, which initially benefited the stock, could now be coming to an end. Let's see what's going to happen here, but there's considerable amounts of pressure on Tesla to deliver, and indeed the investors are actually raising the question whether it has been a positive or actually a negative that Elon Musk has been so close to the president and making so many comments on different topics, including whether the U.S. should actually leave the defense alliance.
Yeah, Musk has been commenting on a lot. And when you see $100 billion in losses, you absolutely have to ask that question. CNBC's Sylvia Amaro live with us from London. Thank you. A new update this morning on the Justice Department's push to have federal charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams dropped. In court documents filed on Friday, Paul Clement, the attorney appointed by the judge overseeing the case, recommended that Judge Dale Ho dismiss the charges like the DOJ is requesting, but do it with one major condition. Clement wants to remove the ability to refile these charges in the future. Basically the central crux of the pushback here. The possibility of the charges being refiled has been a major sticking point. Numerous DOJ officials that resigned as a result of the order to dismiss expressed concern with the Trump administration's ability to use Mayor Adams' indictment as potential future leverage. Clement argues that by dismissing the charges with prejudice, meaning that the government can't bring the same charges in the future, that the issue is resolved. Mayor Adams has always maintained his innocence on this matter. After Clement's recommendation was filed on Friday, the DOJ filed one of their own, again pressing that it wanted the option to refile charges. The decision whether or not to drop the charges will still fall on the judge. Let's bring in former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg. Dave, so what's happening here, and do you think that the judge should accept this recommendation?
Good to be with you, Ali. Yes, I think Judge Ho will accept the recommendation, and I think this is the best case scenario for Eric Adams. It's also a loss for Donald Trump, because if Judge Ho accepts the recommendation, then Donald Trump loses all of his leverage over Mayor Adams. The Trump administration would have overplayed its hand because Trump spent a lot of political capital to help a Democrat in a Democratic city with nothing guaranteed in return. So the only plus for the administration, if this happens, is that the Department of Justice will finally be able to put this behind them. This has been quite an ordeal. 7 resignations within the Southern District of New York already. You know, prosecutors, Ali, have discretion and can dismiss cases because the facts are weak or because the law is unclear or unfavorable. And here the Supreme Court has ruled that it's tougher now for prosecutors to do public corruption cases. But the problem is that Emile Beauvais, the number 2 person at the DOJ, said in a letter that the dismissal was to ensure Adams' political cooperation. And that's the problem that Judge Ho and Paul Clement and much of the public have. And I share that concern. So I do think that Clement is right to say that we need to stop or at least get that sword of Damocles out from above Eric Adams' head. It's not right that this is done without prejudice just in case he does or does not play ball. You can't do that. And that's why I think it's going to happen that there will be no takebacks, no future leverage. I think it will be dismissed with prejudice.
And so that might solve the idea or the illusion of impropriety that many people have seized on between the Trump administration and the mayor of New York. But I want to remind people of what one of the many letters that we saw during the initial flurry of activity on this said, because the former head of the SDNY, Danielle Sassoon, wrote in a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi that they were previously planning on filing new charges against the mayor. So if the judge dismisses these charges with prejudice, does that mean that those other charges go away, or could they still be filed?
They'd be so similar and intertwined with the old charges that they would not be able to be refiled. You'd have to find really a separate matter. And this Department of Justice is not going to file the charges based on everything we've seen so far, where they do believe that the whole matter should not have been brought because of weak evidence, because of the Supreme Court cases on public corruption, and anything that stems from that, like obstruction of justice, will not be brought. But, you know, even though Eric Adams is going to get his best case scenario and have the whole matter dismissed, at least that's my prediction, nothing, though, will help Eric Adams' reelection chances.
Yeah.
He bargained away his political career as a Democrat in New York by cozying up to Donald Trump and choosing freedom over power. And so now he's got Andrew Cuomo to deal with, and there's no way that Adams is going to be reelected after this saga. So at least for his sake, he's going to be free, but still, he won't be able to live in Gracie Mansion much longer.
And yet we'll see the way that that primary ultimately shakes out. But I'll ask a loaded question to just button this up. If this ends with a dismissal with prejudice, why isn't this just what we saw in the first instance? The Trump administration knew what the outgrowth of a without prejudice dismissal was likely going to be. Why didn't we just start here as opposed to just ending here?
Yeah, I think they should have started there. In fact, the chief of staff to the attorney general came out with a series of tweets that said that look at the problems with this case. This case should not have been brought. The evidence is bad. The Supreme Court decisions are not favorable. So in essence, the chief of staff was saying this should have been dismissed with prejudice. The problem is that you also have the number two person there saying, no, without prejudice. And I think that, you know, the problem is with the political leverage, and that should never have happened. Prosecutors follow the evidence in the law. It shouldn't be about politics. So yes, eventually it got to the with prejudice dismissal. It didn't have to get this far. This whole saga did not have to happen, but here we are. Former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg, thank you as always for breaking it down. And earlier, as the Trump administration continues efforts to scale back the federal workforce, we've learned employees within the Department of Health and Human Services have been offered another voluntary buyout to resign from their jobs. According to an administration official, each of the 80,000 employees at the department was sent an unsigned email on Friday offering them as much as $25,000 to resign from their jobs by 5 p.m. on March 14th. The offer comes just days after President Trump told his cabinet secretaries to make cuts to their own departments, clarifying that they, not Elon Musk or Doge, are in charge of making their own staffing decisions. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security has begun performing polygraph tests on some of their employees. According to 4 sources familiar with the practice, it's in an effort to find out who might be leaking information to the media regarding immigration operations. This comes as border czar Tom Homan and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem have blamed lower than expected ICE arrests on recent leaks that have revealed the cities where planned operations were conducted. DHS released a statement reading in part, "The Department of Homeland Security is a national security agency. We can, should, and will polygraph personnel." Joining us now, senior NBC News national politics reporter Jonathan Allen. I'm just going to call you the king of news. You've got so many titles there, my friend. Let's start, of course, with those DHS polygraph tests. You reported on this story for us. So how are people within the agency reacting to this tests? And is this a normal thing for government to do? Is this standard practice that people just might not have paid attention to?
Well, I think it's certainly going to create a chilling factor on people who work at the Department of Homeland Security, which I think is part of the point, and it shouldn't be surprising that the department doesn't want people leaking information about its immigration activities, its immigration raids. But I talked to a source who basically told me this weekend that they were going dark because of the polygraph test. So it's working at least at that level. There are certain agencies where it's not uncommon to polygraph employees under certain circumstances. For example, the Secret Service has been known to do it, so it's not entirely new. At the same time, it is something that is new for this administration, and it's something that is sending a shockwave through the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, and a chilling effect, as it's intended to do. Plus, we know from the last administration, there was a lot done to try to deter leakers. It was a regular gripe of the president in his first term. So now we're seeing it trickle out to the agencies themselves. I want to turn, staying on the agencies, but moving to buyout offers that we mentioned in our introduction. Tens of thousands of government employees have received them from the Trump administration as they continue to slash the federal workforce. Do you know if more people are clamoring to accept these deals? The first one was flimsy at best in terms of how much it could be trusted.
Yeah, I don't have a real full accounting, and I'm not sure anybody will for a long time, even though there are reports from, periodically from the administration. I think what can be certainly said is that with all the cuts going on, the incentive to take a buyout is a lot stronger than it was at the very beginning of the administration. It was unclear what would happen. I think now it's very clear that Elon Musk is going to slash as many jobs as he possibly can at as many agencies as he can. And then the directors of those agencies, the cabinet secretaries, will say that those were their choices, as we're starting to see a sort of pushback from them on who gets to claim the credit or blame for those. But yeah, I expect over time we'll see more of the federal government workers take the buyout simply because they expect that they're going to be fired anyway.
I know that was one of the things, the sentiments that I heard from federal workers when I was at a town hall about 2 weeks ago, saying that the pain point within is the point for the administration, trying to make it so that people don't want to stay in their jobs. Of course, some folks are digging in further. Others are doing exactly that, taking that buyout and finding their way to the exit. But you write in a piece over the weekend, you say Trump's populist platform gives way to a billionaire's agenda. And there was a line in it that really struck me. You say, no paradox has been as vivid for Trump backers as the president claiming to strike a blow for the people by giving Musk free rein to cancel grants, contracts, and entire agencies, those decisions resulting in economic pain for some Trump supporters. So what's the political fallout for that? I mean, we probably won't know it to the midterms, but how are you tracking it?
I mean, if you're Trump, you're lucky in that there is no political fallout for you unless you attempt to run for a third term. That is to say, he's not on the ballot again, so what does he care, right? I mean, from a political perspective. As far as the midterms go, I think that there's significant potential blowback on that. You're seeing Trump voters lose their jobs. Unlike what Trump has said before, the entire federal government is not a whole bunch of Democratic voters. So there's people who are losing their jobs who voted for Trump. Some of them have said that they have regret about that. In addition to that, a lot of these programs serve Trump voters. What we're seeing with the budget that's making its way through Congress right now, a huge slashing of government programs, and at the same time, a major tax cut that would largely reward the wealthy in the country. So, if the mission was to be popular, or let's put it this way, if the message was to be populist, the mission is to favor the plutocrats. We're seeing Elon Musk expand his footprint with his Starlink in the federal government since he got a government position, which people would have been screaming holy hell about the conflict of interest there in past years.
And certainly we have been pointing out those conflicts of interest, but it's not a deterrent within the White House, at least not yet. NBC's Jonathan Allen, as always, thank you, my friend.